What would you sacrifice for the person you love? Your comfort, your dreams? What about your womb?
What about your children's future?
In Ilú-Ẹ, one woman answered that question. And 5 generations later, her family is still paying the price. In Ilú-Ẹ, they say wealth never comes alone. It brings something with it. Sometimes, it brings silence. Sometimes, it brings blood. And sometimes, it brings a curse that waits patiently for generations. This is how Abike's story began. Okonji was not always a poor man, but poverty had a way of sitting on his shoulders like an old debt he could never finish paying. Even on days when food entered the house, hunger still followed him. Even when laughter visited, worry slept in the corners. The smell of watered-down soup became so familiar that Abike sometimes forgot what real stew tasted like. The sound of her daughter's stomach growling at night was louder than any complaint the child ever spoke. In Ilú-Ẹ, people measured a man not by his words, but by how his household breathed. And Okonji's household breathed heavily, like a child struggling in sleep. Abike noticed it before he ever spoke about it. She noticed how Okonji would return from the farms later than others, not because he worked harder, but because he delayed coming home to face what waited there. She noticed how he counted cowries more than once, hoping they would multiply by mercy. She noticed how silence grew between them, not the angry kind, but the tired one. The kind that settles into a marriage like dust, covering everything that used to shine. Abike was not a loud woman. She carried her strength quietly, the way the earth carries seeds. When she walked through the village paths with her daughter tied to her back, people greeted her with respect. She greeted them back with a smile that did not reveal how many nights she had prayed without answers. Their daughter was still small then. A girl with curious eyes who asked questions about everything, including things adults preferred not to explain. Sometimes she would point at the moon and ask why it followed them home. Sometimes she would ask why her father sighed even when he was not speaking. Sometimes she would ask why other children had full bellies and she did not. Abike would stroke her hair and give her answers soft enough for a child, even when her own heart had none. There came a season when poverty stopped knocking and began sleeping inside their house. That was the season Okonji sold his last goat. It was the season Abike learned how to stretch soup with water and still call it a meal. It was the season neighbors stopped borrowing salt from them, because everyone knew there was nothing left to borrow. And it was during this season that Abike met her old friend again. Her name was Monike. They had grown up together before life carried them in different directions. Monike had left Ilú-Ẹ years ago and returned changed. Her wrappers were newer. Her steps were lighter. Her laughter did not hesitate. The scent of imported oils followed her. People noticed these things even before Abike did. They met at the stream, where women gathered in the mornings to wash clothes and exchange news disguised as greetings. At first, they spoke of small things. Children. The dryness of the season. The way time no longer waited for anyone. But Abike noticed that Monike's eyes studied her, not with pity, but with certainty. Like someone who had found an answer and was deciding whether to share it. Later that day, as the sun leaned westward and threw long shadows across the compounds, Monike followed Abike home. She did not speak immediately. She waited until Abike finished preparing the evening meal, waited until Okonji had stepped out to sit under the tree with other men, waited until the child had fallen asleep with her small fist curled against her cheek. Only then did she speak. There are problems, Monike said gently, her voice low and careful, that do not answer to hard work. Abike did not reply. She kept her hands busy with the clay pot, scrubbing it clean though it was already clean. She knew the kind of conversation that began that way. There are doors, Monike continued, lowering her voice even more, that refuse to open no matter how many times you knock. Abike kept her eyes on the pot, on her hands, on anything except her friend's face. And there are men, Monike said, who stand at crossroads without knowing which path has already chosen them. That was when Abike looked up. Monarchy told her about Baba Arogbono the way people speak about storms, carefully, without exaggeration, but with respect. She did not call him a good man. She did not call him evil. She only said he was old. Older than stories. Older than excuses. Older than the lies people told themselves about what they would and would not do for survival. He does not beg, she said. He does not force. He only asks. And if you can pay the price, he delivers what he promises. Always. Abike felt something shift inside her, like a pot beginning to crack from heat. She did not answer immediately. She did not agree. She did not ask questions. But that night, when Okonji slept beside her, she lay awake listening to his breathing and wondered how long love could survive hunger. How long marriage could survive shame. How long hope could survive watching your child grow thinner while other children grew round. Abike didn't know it yet, but that conversation would change everything. Not just for her. Not just for her daughter. For 5 generations of women who hadn't even been born yet. It took 3 days before she spoke to Okonji about it. She chose her words slowly, the way one chooses firewood in the dark, testing each piece for soundness before adding it to the pile. She told him about Monarchy's visit. About Baba Arogbono. About the possibility of change, of wealth, of a different kind of life. She did not tell him it was easy. She did not tell him it was without cost. She only told him it was possible. Okonji laughed at first. Not because he found it funny, but because disbelief was easier than fear. Then he stopped laughing. Then he asked questions. Then he grew silent. That night, Okonji lay awake beside Abike, listening to her breathe. He could leave this alone, he thought. He could refuse. They could stay poor together, struggle together, survive together. People did. His own parents had. Their parents before them. Poverty wasn't death, after all. Then his daughter coughed in her sleep, that hollow cough of children who don't eat enough, and shame burned through him. What kind of man couldn't feed his family? What kind of father let his child go hungry when there was a solution, any solution, within reach? What kind of husband made his wife count calories until her fingers cramped while other women bought new cloth without thinking? By the time the moon rose high enough to pour silver through the window, he had agreed. They did not tell anyone where they were going. Not the elders. Not the neighbors. Not even the child, who woke to find them preparing to leave and asked questions they could not answer. They left before dawn, walking the path that led away from familiar farms and into bushland where sound behaved differently. Where bird calls seemed to come from the wrong direction. Where even the air felt heavier, older, like breathing in someone else's memory. They walked that path in silence, neither of them knowing that some paths, once walked, cannot be retraced. Some choices, once made, echo louder than screams. Baba Arogbono's shrine did not announce itself. There was no sign painted on trees. No gate. No clearing that suggested human habitation. Only a sudden stillness, as if the forest had decided to listen. The birds stopped calling. The insects stopped buzzing. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. The air inside Baba Arogbono's shrine was thick with smoke from herbs Abike couldn't name. It burned her throat. Made her eyes water. Or maybe that was something else entirely. The walls were covered in things she tried not to look at too closely. Bones. Cloth. Symbols drawn in substances she didn't want to identify. The smell was overwhelming, equal parts incense and decay and something ancient that had no name. The seer did not rise when they entered. He sat in shadow, so still he might have been carved from the same wood as the shrine itself. He did not greet them. He did not ask why they had come. He only looked at Okonji for a long time, so long that Okonji began to shift his weight from foot to foot like a child being examined by elders. Finally, Baba Arogbono spoke. His voice was dry, like leaves scraping against stone. What do you want? Okonji swallowed. His throat clicked in the silence. I want to be rich. The air shifted. Something in the shrine seemed to wake up, to lean forward with interest. Baba Arogbono nodded once, slowly, as if this was the answer he had been expecting. Then bring me a woman's womb. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush breath. Heavy enough to stop hearts. Abike felt the words land in her chest like stones thrown into deep water, sinking, finding no bottom. Bring me a woman's womb. For words that should have ended the conversation. For words that should have sent them running back to their hungry compound, back to their poverty, back to the safety of problems that could be solved with time and work and prayer. Okonji shook his head immediately. He laughed again, this time too quickly, too desperately, the laugh of a man who has heard something impossible and is trying to unhear it. I don't know where to find such a thing, he said. We should go. This was a mistake. We should leave. We should never have come here. His hand reached for Abike's arm, pulling her toward the entrance, toward escape, toward the path that would take them back to familiar hunger. That was when Abike understood. She saw it clearly, like lightning illuminating a dark path. Baba Arogbono wasn't asking Okonji to go searching. He wasn't sending them on a quest to find some stranger, some willing sacrifice, some woman who had already agreed to this madness. He was asking if Okonji had brought one with him. He was asking if Okonji had brought her. And Okonji had. Even if he didn't know it. Even if he would never admit it. Even if he spent the rest of his life telling himself he would never have asked, never have suggested, never have considered it. She could leave. She could take her husband's hand and walk out of this shrine and back to their hungry compound. They would survive. People did. Poverty wasn't death, after all. It was just poverty. Just endless stretching and scraping and going without. Just watching your child grow slower than other children. Just seeing disappointment settle into your husband's eyes like sediment in water. But she looked at Okonji's face, really looked at it, and saw everything written there. The shame of being unable to provide. The desperation of watching his family suffer. The hope he was trying so hard to hide, hope that maybe, somehow, this could work. Hope that maybe Abike would offer what he could never bring himself to ask for. And she thought about their daughter asking why other children had full bellies. She thought about how love was supposed to be sacrificed. She thought about how women were always the ones asked to prove their devotion with flesh and blood and futures. She thought about how, if she didn't do this, Okonji would resent her. He would look at his hungry child and blame her for not being willing to pay the price. Their marriage would rot from inside, slowly, the way fruit rots, starting at the core where no one can see until suddenly everything collapses. She would lose him anyway, slowly, bitterly, with nothing to show for it. At least this way, her sacrifice would mean something. At least this way, she could give him what he needed. At least this way, love would be enough. She stepped forward. Her voice did not shake. That was important to her somehow, that her voice remained steady. That she make this choice with dignity, with clarity, with full knowledge of what she was offering. Take mine. The war did not end at that moment. That was the cruelest part. The shrine did not collapse. Thunder did not crack the sky. The earth did not open to swallow them whole. The word simply continued, indifferent to the enormity of what had just been spoken. When Okonji turned to her, his eyes wide with protest and relief fighting each other for control of his face, Abike did not look away. She held his gaze and saw the exact moment when protest died and relief won. Saw the exact moment when he accepted what she was offering. Saw the exact moment when he decided to let her do this terrible thing so he wouldn't have to. She thought of nights without food. She thought of her daughter's future. She thought of love and how it demanded proof, always sacrifice, always more than you thought you could give. The ritual was quiet. Painful, but quiet. Baba Arogbono moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he prepared what needed to be prepared. The pain was sharp and deep and seemed to last forever, but Abike did not cry out. She beat down on the leather strap he gave her and tasted blood and kept silent. When it was done, when the thing that had defined her as a woman was gone, placed in whatever vessel Baba Arogbono kept such offerings, he looked at Okonji with eyes that held no judgment but plenty of knowledge. "If you betray her," he said quietly, "the ground will remember." Okonji promised. He swore. He took oaths he meant with his whole heart in that moment. He would never betray her. He would honor this sacrifice forever. He would spend his life proving her choice was not in vain. And he meant it. That was the terrible truth. In that moment, with Abike's blood still fresh and her pain still visible, Okonji meant every word. They walked home in complete silence. The path seemed shorter somehow, or maybe they were both too numb to notice distance. Abike's hand went to her belly unconsciously, over and over, touching the place where something had been removed. Okonji tried to take her other hand. She let him, but her palm was cold despite the warmth of the day. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say after you've just traded your future for your present? After you've just sold tomorrow to buy today? And wealth came. It came slowly at first, then all at once, the way dawn comes, gradual and then sudden. Crops that had struggled before suddenly flourished. Seeds Okonji planted seemed to double overnight. Animals he bought stayed healthy, multiplied, brought prices at market that made other men's eyes widen. Trade routes that had been closed suddenly opened. Men who had never noticed him before began seeking his opinion. Opportunities arrived like gifts from invisible benefactors. Within a year, Okonji was no longer poor. Within 2, he was comfortable. Within 3, he was wealthy by any measure that mattered in Ilú-Ẹ. The first real meal they ate after the ritual, Abike cooked meat. Real meat, not the scraps and bones they had survived on before, but thick cuts that sizzled in the pot and filled the compound with smells that made mouths water. Their daughter laughed with pure delight, the kind of laughter that comes from a belly finally full. Okonji smiled with satisfaction, looking around at his household like a man who had finally achieved something worth achieving. And Abike touched her belly and felt nothing. Not pain. Not emptiness. Just nothing. A void where something used to be. And somehow that was worse than any physical pain. To feel the absence of feeling. To know that part of her was simply gone, erased, as if it had never existed. But she smiled anyway. She laughed with her daughter. She accepted Okonji's satisfied looks with grace. Because this was what she had chosen. This was the price she had agreed to pay. The wealth did not change Okonji all at once. That was the most dangerous thing about it. It arrived gently, like a visitor who removed his sandals at the door and spoke with respect. At first, Okonji still woke early. He still greeted Abike with familiarity. He still carried himself like a man who remembered hunger. But slowly, very slowly, wealth began to rearrange his silence. He started returning home later. Not from work, but from meetings that required no explanation. He began to speak less about plans and more about results. When Abike asked questions, he answered kindly, but briefly, as though details were now beneath explanation. As though she wouldn't understand the complexities of what he was building. The compound began to smell different. New cloth. Imported oils. Palm wine that hadn't been watered down. Even the dust seemed cleaner, as if poverty itself had been swept away and forbidden from returning. The village noticed before Abike did. Women whispered that Okonji had the glow of men who no longer feared tomorrow. Men watched him with admiration edged by caution, the way people watch fire, appreciating its warmth while respecting its capacity for destruction. Children pointed at his compound and counted his goats aloud, their voices filled with awe. Wealth had wrapped itself around him so tightly that even his shadow looked different, longer, more substantial, as if prosperity had physical weight. Abike felt it first in her sleep. She began to dream of rooms with no doors. Of children crying behind walls she could not touch. Of her daughter standing at a distance, waving, growing older each time Abike blinked until suddenly she was a woman Abike didn't recognize. When she woke, her chest would be tight, her wrapper damp with sweat that smelled like fear. Okonji slept beside her, breathing deeply, untouched by the nights that troubled her. She did not complain. She never did. She only prayed more, though the prayers felt like they were hitting a ceiling and falling back down, unanswered. Their daughter grew into a sharp-eyed girl who noticed everything. She noticed how her father spoke to her mother without looking at her. She noticed how laughter no longer stayed long in the house. She noticed how wealth had brought many visitors but fewer conversations. She was too young to understand what had changed, but old enough to feel it, that subtle shift in the air that children sense before adults admit it. The seasons turned. The rains came and went. Children grew. Elders died. Ilú-Ẹ continued, the way villages do, while beneath the surface, something patient and permanent was taking root. Then came the woman. She did not arrive loudly. She did not come through the front gates with announcements. She came like rumors always do, first as silence, then as pauses in conversation, then as questions wrapped in concern. Someone mentioned seeing Okonji in another village more often than necessary. Someone mentioned gifts being purchased for no clear reason. Someone mentioned laughter that did not belong to business discussions. Abike heard these things the way one hears distant thunder, hoping the storm would change direction, knowing deep down it wouldn't. It didn't. The truth arrived the day Okonji told her plainly, without anger, without shame, as if he were discussing the weather or the crops. She is pregnant, he said. The word did not break immediately. It tilted. Shifted. Like standing on ground you thought was solid only to discover it was built on sand. Abike sat down slowly, as if afraid sudden movements might shatter something fragile. The air in the room felt too thin. Her hands found the edge of the sleeping mat and gripped it, needing something solid, something that wouldn't disappear the way everything else seemed to be disappearing. She did not shout. She did not cry. She only asked one question, her voice barely above a whisper. Why? Okonji hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. Told her he had been preparing for this conversation. Told her he had rehearsed his reasons. Told her he had already decided this was justified, necessary, inevitable. He spoke of lineage. Of sons. Of legacy. Of what men required to be complete. He did not speak of love. He did not speak of promises made in a shrine that smelled of smoke and sacrifice. He did not speak of Baba Arogbono's warning. He did not speak of the womb Abike had given so he could have this wealth he now used to build a life with another woman. Okonji told himself it wasn't really betrayal. The thoughts came easily now, worn smooth by repetition. Abike couldn't give him sons, not through any fault of her own, but the fact remained. He was wealthy now. Wealthy men had multiple wives. This was culture, tradition, logic. Men needed heirs. Needed sons to carry their names. This was simply how things were done. These thoughts helped during the day, when he could stay busy with business and expansion and the endless demands of managing wealth. At night, when he dreamed of Baba Arogbono's eyes, not angry, not accusing, just watching, just waiting, logic provided no comfort at all. That night, Abike did not sleep. She sat awake until dawn, listening to Ilú-Ẹ breathe, listening to the night sounds that had always comforted her but now seemed ominous, waiting. She thought of her womb, somewhere in Baba Arogbono's shrine, preserved in whatever way such things were preserved. She thought of her sacrifice. She thought of how easily vows were remembered when poverty was present and forgotten when wealth arrived. She thought of how love, given unwisely, becomes a knife handed willingly to another's hand. Years have a way of hiding truth. They pile up like dust, covering what should be remembered until someone finally sweeps, and everything buried is suddenly visible again. She left Akonji's house 3 days later. Not in anger. Not with accusations or sins that would give the village something to discuss for seasons. In silence. She simply gathered her things and her daughter and walked back to the small compound that had been her father's, that stood empty now since her parents had passed. The village watched her go with curiosity, not knowing they were witnessing the beginning of something that would outlive them all. Akonji did not follow. Did not beg her to return. He told himself it was respect for her dignity. That he was giving her space to accept what could not be changed. But the truth was simpler and more cowardly. He was relieved. Relieved he didn't have to see the accusation in her eyes anymore. Relieved he didn't have to remember what she had given up every time he looked at her. The ground remembered what Akonji tried to forget. Years passed again. The kind of years that move slowly but arrive suddenly, so you look up one day and realize a lifetime has gone by while you were busy with smaller things. Their daughter grew beautiful, intelligent, everything a mother could want. She had Abike's quiet strength and her father's sharp mind. She married a good man from a neighboring village, a farmer with kind eyes and calloused hands and a laugh that made people smile. For 3 years, they were happy. She bore him one daughter, perfect and healthy, with tiny fingers that gripped and eyes that saw everything. Then her husband's eyes began to wander. Then came the arguments, quiet at first, then louder. Then came the silence, the terrible kind that fills a house like flood water. Then came the other woman. On the day she returned to her mother's compound, leading a small child by the hand and carrying everything she owned in a single cloth bundle, Abike looked at her daughter's face and saw her own story written there. The same expression. The same defeat wrapped in dignity. The same understanding that some patterns run deeper than choice. That was when the first code understanding touched Abike's heart. When she realized that what had been done to her was not finished. That it was, in fact, just beginning. The granddaughter grew in Abike's compound, raised by 2 generations of women who had been abandoned. She was careful, this one. Observant. She watched her mother and grandmother and understood, even without being told directly, that marriage was something to approach with caution. She chose her husband wisely. Took her time. Prayed harder than her mother had. Did everything right. Found a man who seemed different, who promised differently, who swore he would never be like other men. It made no difference. 3 years. 1 daughter. Betrayal. Return. The pattern repeated with the precision of a curse that knew its work well. It was an old woman, one who had lived through enough seasons to see patterns others missed, who finally spoke the words aloud. She sat with Abike one evening, watching 3 generations of women in that compound, mother, daughter, granddaughter, each with 1 child, each abandoned after 3 years, and said quietly, almost tenderly, as if sorry to be the one to name it. The ground remembers, sister. The ground always remembers. And just like that, the whispers began. People started counting years. Started noticing patterns. Started remembering the old stories about Akonji's sudden wealth. About how he never explained where it came from. About how Abike had left him shortly after he became rich. About Baba Arogbono and the prices he demanded for the impossible things he delivered. The story came together slowly, the way fog lifts, revealing what was always there but hidden. And with it came the understanding that some debts are paid by people who never borrowed. That some prices are paid across generations like interest that compounds forever. It took generations before someone remembered Baba Arogbono's exact words. If you betray her, the ground will remember. And Ilú-Ẹ did. The curse did not shout. It did not rage. It did not announce itself with drama or spectacle. It simply followed the women born of Abike's blood, one generation at a time, patient and permanent, reminding them that some prices are paid long after the buyer is gone. Time did not heal what happened in Ilú-Ẹ. It only buried it deeper, the way earth buries bones while keeping their shape. Abike lived long enough to see the pattern establish itself. Long enough to watch her daughter return home with dulled eyes. Long enough to help raise her granddaughter and see her repeat the same cycle. Long enough to understand that what had been done could not be undone, no matter how much she prayed. She never accused Okonji publicly. She never stood before elders to recount what had been done to her. What would be the point? Who would believe that a man's wealth came from his wife's womb? Who would understand the transaction that had taken place in Baba Arogbono's shrine? But at night, when the village settled into sleep and the moon climbed its familiar path across the sky, Abike would sit outside her hut and speak softly to the darkness, to the ground, to whatever force was listening. I gave what I had, she would say, her voice barely carrying beyond her own ears. I kept my promise. The wind never answered. Okonji, meanwhile, grew old surrounded by abundance. His compound expanded until it rivaled those of chiefs. His wealth multiplied until counting it became meaningless. His name was spoken in distant villages with respect and envy. But something within him shrank quietly, the way a piece of fruit shrivels while the skin stays intact. He avoided paths that passed near Abike's dwelling. He avoided questions about his first wife. He avoided memories of smoke-filled shrines and promises made with blood fresh on the floor. He avoided looking at the daughters and granddaughters who bore Abike's face, who walked with her quiet dignity, who suffered her curse. Sometimes, when the night was too quiet and sleep was too far away, he would dream of Baba Arogbono's eyes. Not angry. Not accusing. Just watching. Just waiting. Just remembering what Okonji was trying so hard to forget. When Okonji died, Ilú-Ẹ mourned him as a successful man. They counted his riches, tallied his achievements, listed his surviving children. They praised his legacy, his business sense, his rise from poverty to prominence. They buried him with honor, with ceremony, with all the rituals due to a man of his standing. No one spoke of wombs. No one spoke of promises broken in the pursuit of sons. No one spoke of the wives he had used and discarded like tools that had served their purpose. The earth covered him gently, the way earth covers everyone, making no distinction between the just and the unjust. But the earth remembered. Generations later, when Abike herself was long gone, buried in the same ground that held Okonji, though their graves were deliberately placed far apart, the story began to surface again. Not as history, but as warning. Not as past, but as present continuous. Women started noticing patterns their mothers and grandmothers had noticed. Started counting years with uneasy precision. Started watching their marriages approach the 3-year mark like watching storm clouds gather, knowing what was coming but powerless to stop it. Elders began to speak in half-sentences when certain families were mentioned, leaving things unsaid that everyone understood anyway. One night, a young woman of Abike's lineage sat with her only daughter beside a dying fire. The child was 2 years old, at that age when questions pour out like water from a broken pot. This particular night, watching her mother's face in the firelight, she asked the question that all children in their family eventually asked. Why don't husbands stay? The woman had no answer prepared. How do you explain a curse to a child? How do you tell your daughter that her great-great-great-grandmother made a choice out of love that trapped every woman after her in a pattern of abandonment? How do you make a 2-year-old understand that some debts are inherited like a color or the shape of your hands? She looked at the child's face and saw Abike's eyes looking back at her across time. Saw the same intelligence, the same strength, the same capacity for sacrifice that had started all of this. She only said, keeping her voice gentle, some deaths were not ours to make. The child didn't understand. Not then. But she would. They all did, eventually. Understanding came with the marriage ceremony, with the first year of happiness, with the second year of subtle changes, with the third year of watching everything fall apart exactly as it had for every woman before them. And still, the curse did not break. Women tried everything. They married different kinds of men. They married outside the village. They didn't marry at all. They prayed to every deity whose name they knew. They consulted healers and priests and anyone who claimed to understand such things. Nothing worked. The pattern was too deep, carved into something more permanent than flesh. 3 years. 1 daughter. Betrayal. Return. Over and over and over, like a song that never ends, like a story that keeps repeating the same chapter. In Ilú-Ẹ, people learned lessons the slow way, through watching, through suffering, through counting the women who returned to their mothers' compounds with babies on their backs and nothing else to show for their marriages. They learned that love offered without wisdom can become a knife handed willingly to another's hand. They learned that wealth begged for in darkness listens more closely than prayers spoken in light. They learned that greed does not always punish the one who commits it, but those who come after, those who inherit the consequences without inheriting the choice. So when elders now gather children around the fire, when they tell stories to teach lessons that textbooks cannot contain, they begin this story the same way, every time. They do not raise their voices. They do not dramatize. They only say, quietly, like sharing a secret that everyone already knows, in Ilú-Ẹ, wealth never comes alone. And when the children ask why, when they press for details, when they want to know what wealth brings with it, the elders fall silent. They start the fire. They look into the flames. They remember all the women who sacrificed and all the women who paid for those sacrifices. And they say nothing, because some lessons are not meant to comfort. They are meant to warn. Abike's name is still spoken softly in prayers. Not to undo what cannot be undone, but to remember her sacrifice and the cost of forgetting promises. Women speak her name when they marry, when they give birth, when they approach that terrible third year. They speak it like a plea, like a question, like a hope that maybe this time will be different even though it never is. And when women of Ilú-Ẹ pray today, they do not ask for wealth. They learn that lesson well. They do not ask for abundance or prosperity or any of the things that Okonji begged for in that smoke-filled shrine. They ask for mercy. They ask for wisdom. They ask that love should never again be so expensive. They ask that no woman should ever again have to choose between her future and her husband's pride. They ask that the ground might finally forget. The fire dies down. The night listens. Children fall asleep against their mother's sides, their breathing soft and innocent, not yet knowing what patterns wait for them. And the ground, as always, remembers. They say that on certain nights, when the moon is full and the air is still, you can hear weeping in Ilú-Ẹ. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet sobbing, the kind that comes from women who sacrificed everything and received nothing in return. The elders say it's the wind moving through the trees. The women say it's Abike, still mourning what was taken. And the young girls, the ones not yet married, the ones still whole, still hopeful, still believing that their love will be different, that their husbands will be better, that the pattern will somehow skip them, they say nothing at all. They just listen. And they learn. And they wait for their turn, because in Ilú-Ẹ, every woman of Abike's blood gets a turn. This is how the story ends. But in Ilú-Ẹ, some stories never really end. They just wait for the next woman to be born, for the next marriage, for the next 3 years to pass, for the next daughter to be abandoned, for the next generation to learn what the last one learned. That some sacrifices echo forever. That some loves cost more than their worth. That some promises, once broken, can never be mended. That the ground always remembers. My daughter sleeps in the next room. She just turned 2. My husband has been distant lately. We've been married 3 years. I tell her this story even though she's too young to understand. I tell her about her great-great-great-grandmother who loved too much and sacrificed too deeply. I tell her so that maybe, somehow, knowing will break what ignorance could not. But late at night, when I watch my husband's eyes grow distant, when I feel the 3-year mark approaching like a storm I can see but cannot avoid, I wonder if some curses are simply too strong for knowledge to break. I wonder if love, given unwisely, creates debts that compound across generations like interest on a loan that can never be repaid. I wonder if I would be the one to break the pattern, or if I will simply become another name added to the long list of women who returned home carrying daughters and nothing else. The ground is listening. And I am afraid it remembers me too. May we never exchange tomorrow for today's hunger. May we never sell what carries generations. May promises made in desperation not become curses in abundance. And may every womb, every home, every lineage be spared from debts it did not choose. This is how the story ends. Or perhaps, how it continues. Please don't forget to support this channel by subscribing, liking this video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps these African folktales alive and helps them reach people who need these lessons. Now tell me, do you think Abike's curse can ever be broken? Or is the ground's memory eternal? I'm reading every comment.